Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and others who shall remain nameless. You know who you are. Yeah. Oh, well. So it's a beautiful day. It's July 5th, and I'm just having breakfast and getting ready to go to work. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, so that's fixed. Good. Okay. Hmm. Young Earth creationism. Why? The evidence is against you. Most of the evidence was discovered by people who are active practicing Christians. There is nothing about Christianity or Judaism or Islam that requires young earth creationism. Yeah. Why young earth creationism? And I figured it out. It's fear. You're afraid that if you have one question, that you'll have more questions, and that eventually you'll turn into an atheist, and then your God will punish you for it. Yeah. And you're afraid that without a God, without your belief in a God, that all the horrible things that you secretly want to do will suddenly become irresistible. You won't be able to control yourself, you won't be able to restrain yourself, and you'll have to go out and do horrible things. I have to say, this kind of self-loathing is sad, tragic, and yes, pathetic. So what can I do to help you? How can I help you to get past this hurdle, this obstacle, this roadblock? How can I do that? Well, how can I help you to understand that there is nothing in biology or geology or cosmology that forbids a God? Nothing. The fact that I don't believe in a God has nothing to do with science. It has to do with my own observations. The fact of the matter is that you can believe in a God and still accept observable scientific reality. You can do this. Really, you can. But first you have to get past the fear. And the fear is deeply ingrained. I know, I understand. You are terrified. Absolutely terrified. And much of that fear is not tied to science, it's tied to the culture wars. Yeah. It's less about Charles Darwin and more about rock and roll music, civil rights, women getting the vote, and young people objecting to an illegal and immoral war being fought in Asia. And that is where you are coming from. You want to turn things back to the way they were in the 50s. Whether that's the 1950s or the 1850s, doesn't matter. I don't think you've really thought this clearly through. As long as it's the 50s. The problem is that in neither 50s was life the paradise you imagine it to be. Neither one of them. Oh. No. No. Mm. So, your fear of Darwin and Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't come from science. No. It comes from your fear of progress. Yeah, I really do think it is culture war bullshit that drives young earth creationism. It's the fear of progress, the fear of any and all progress. It's the fear that Neil deGrasse Tyson might become a teacher at your kid's school, because you don't want your kid to be educated by somebody with that particular complexion. And it's the fear of rock and roll music and the fear of labor unions, public health care, and other expressions of communism and socialism. It's the fear of a better future, because what you really want is for the world to end, not for it to get better. You want the world to end, and you want it to end spectacularly, preferably with mythical creatures whizzing through the air on leathery bat wings and white feathery wings, zapping each other with magical swords. Yeah, and that's not going to happen. Hey, yep, end of my shift. I'm done. So I'm just on my way to clock out, and it occurs to me, when I was a kid growing up, I used to watch a show called Room 222. I'll tell you about it as soon as I get outside. So I was saying about Room 222. It was a TV show that was on when I was very, very little, back in the late 60s, early 70s period. And there was a character named Mr. Dixon who was a teacher in this show. And one of the recurring themes in the show was parents having a problem with Mr. Dixon. And I didn't understand that. Why would parents have a problem with Mr. Dixon? I mean, he seems like a really great teacher, a really wonderful person. Why would anybody have a problem with him? Why? I couldn't understand that. To me, Mr. Dixon was just obviously a very good school teacher. I didn't understand the concept of racism at that time, but now I do. And Mr. Dixon and the parents who have a problem with Mr. Dixon was my first introduction to the culture wars. And yes, that was way back in the early 70s. The culture wars go back that far, albeit under different names. And yeah, trucks in the background. In any case, my introduction to the culture wars, Room 222, Mr. Dixon, and my being confused as fuck about why parents have a problem with Mr. Dixon. And my many years later, discovering why they had a problem with Mr. Dixon,
And that problem was because his skin was the wrong color. I mean, the show made abundantly clear Mr. Dixon is a very good teacher. And parents shouldn't have a problem with it. But a lot of parents do. And this show was in the late 60s, early 70s. And the message is just as true today as it was then. Certain parents are just really intimidated by the idea of a Mr. Dixon, or worse yet, a Neil deGrasse Tyson. And so, yeah, they are perfectly willing to go to great lengths to discredit such teachers and to discredit all the new, progressive, modern ideas associated with those teachers. And some of those ideas are indeed the Big Bang model for the origin of the universe, the evolutionary model for how life functions, and yes, the old Earth and plate tectonics model of geology, as well as every other scientific fact that undermines their notion that Mr. Dixon should not be allowed to teach my kids school. Yeah. That's the culture wars. The idea that Mr. Dixon is unfit to be a teacher versus the idea that, yes, he is. Yeah. And so it is, even to this day, that the culture war continues unabated. Because, yes, there are still parents who don't want Mr. Dixon to be teaching their precious white daughter how to get from New York to Chicago, or how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, or how to conjugate a verb. They just don't want that to happen because they're afraid. They are afraid, and these are the culture warriors in all their glory. Yeah. Yep. The culture warriors. The people who, incidentally, don't like this program either. Not at all. Definitely something to think about. Absolutely. Something to think about. Yep. Yeah, so the culture warriors who today have a problem with critical race theory being taught to kindergartners and teachers telling kids that they have to change their gender are the same culture warriors who, back when I was a kid, had a problem with the idea of Mr. Dixon being a teacher. Yeah. And they still have a problem with Mr. Dixon being a teacher. They just don't admit to it quite as readily. But yeah, they're still very upset that some woke TV show decided to portray Mr. Dixon as a school teacher instead of as a janitor, the way that God intended. Yeah, that's the culture wars, and that is why the culture warriors are so terrified of allowing evolution to be taught in schools.